Let me start by asking you about the meetings that you had today. You met with folks at the FTC and the Department of Justice. Just share, if you could, the substance of those conversations. What were you talking to those counterparts about today?
Well, we don't share the substance because very often we have the opportunity just to take stock of open cases. And since they're open, of course, this is not something that we can share with a wider audience.
Given what we've read in the news about vacancies at these departments, the fact that you have people on an interim basis filling a lot of these roles at the FTC, at the Department of Justice, is that merely a frustration, or is that proving to be difficult as you work with counterparts across the Atlantic? Is it somehow different not having permanent political appointees in place at these organizations?
Well, maybe to some degree in the beginning I wondered, but now I got to know both Maureen Olhausen and Andrew Finch rather well. I met a couple of times, and there is such a strong culture of very concrete cooperation between the case teams because they share this culture of serving the consumer in the market. And therefore, you know, it is very concrete, it's very direct, it's a very good cooperation.
I wonder if you could just give me some insight into that cooperation. You're doing your own investigations, working on your own cases. That's happening here in the U.S. As well. What's the ideal relationship like between your office and the FTC, say, or the Department of Justice?
Well, to some degree, actually, we have a different legal basis, so it's not at all just the same. But with the necessary waivers from businesses, we can discuss and exchange to test hypotheses about would this be a competition concern? How do you see this? So the case team, they call each other. Sometimes they come together. We have had U.S. People coming over for some of our hearings. We go here if something concrete is happening. So it's quite intertwined. Of course, very respectful of the differences, but also very concrete on making it right and getting a very high quality in the casework.
A question to you as an observer of this place. I think you and I last spoke. You were here after the election, so you've spent some time in D.C. Does the terrain look different from you? Does the rhetoric about antitrust, for instance, or competition or regulation sound different coming to Washington now, 7-8 months into this president's term?
Well, it is as if there is a renewed interest, more debates. I saw it already in the election campaign. I think there's more debate about how to make sure that consumers are well served. How to make sure that you have vibrant competition, because competition is a driver not only for low prices and choice, but also for innovation to be able to, in the future, to produce affordable prices and choice. And a lot is going on here, and I find that very inspiring.
A couple of days ago, some senators on Capitol Hill proposed a new mechanism for enforcement, Senator Amy Klobuchar among them. And the point that she was making, as I understand it, is the rules, the policies are outdated. We need to refresh them. Taking a sort of broad perspective on that, when you look at policy, enforcement policy, broadly speaking, does it need to be updated, do you think? Do you feel that policy hasn't kept step with where things are when it comes to technology, say?
Well, for obvious reasons, I've been looking at the European situation. And of course, we've been asking ourselves the same question, because markets are developing very fast, things are changing, tech and digitalization is forming our society. But I find that our basic rules, they're fine, because some of the motives, well, they're the same. It's greed, it's fear combined with power. That can be a very, very strong combination. And we can deal with that. Our challenge is, of course, to keep our tools sharp and also to develop new tools, because we have to be as skilled when it comes to going through massive amounts of data as anyone else. And that, of course, is a challenge, but we accept it to develop with the pace of the market participants.
We've talked about cooperation. How problematic is it if you guys are not on the same page? I think of when you have been, with Halliburton, Baker Hughes, for instance. Then you look at Qualcomm and NXP, and you're in different camps, it seems like. What kind of problems does that pose, if any, when you and the U.S. aren't on the same page?
Well, exactly in this example, that remains to be seen, because we're not done yet. But it happens quite rarely. When it happens, I think very often there are very concrete reasons that the market situation is not the same. The market participants play different roles. So very often I find that you have objective reasons when we divide in how we look at a case.
How do you assess the efficacy of what you're doing? I think we first spoke after you levied the back tax fine on Apple of 13 billion euros. Have you started to see changes as a result of that? Do you see companies publicly reconsidering, in private with you, talking about the way that they pay their taxes or don't pay their taxes? Has it had an effect on the way companies work from a policy perspective?
Well, yes, I think that change is coming. It is slow because it takes some time, and I think it will be faster when our courts have dealt with the cases. But you also see member states starting themselves to change their legislation. In Luxembourg and Cyprus on the financing companies, in Ireland on the legislation allowing for what we call a double Irish, which is being outphased. And then, of course, the legislative pace in the European Union as such has also changed. There's much more vigor, and member states are much more ready to say, well, we want a level playing field, and we want our tax authorities to work together in order to get it right. Because we see so many businesses, they pay their taxes exactly as one would expect. That should not just be for the many, it should be for everyone.
There was news today of Northrop Grumman looking to buy Orbital ATK. You're seeing a lot of consolidation of very big companies, reducing the size of the playing field in a number of sectors. That's aerospace or defense. Is that inherently a problematic thing? Does it raise concerns to see big companies merging, acquiring, and the field of players becoming smaller?
Well, it always depends, because sometimes we see that it may be possible for a merger to enable lower prices to consumers, that efficiencies can be passed on to consumers. So we never have sort of an opinion beforehand. We go into the analysis with an open mind to make sure that also post-merger that consumers will be very well served.
Just give us some insight, if you would, into how you decide which cases to take up, what the process is like that leads to an investigation or the opening of a case.
Well, mergers, they just knock on our door.
Yeah, and you have very limited time to respond.
Yes, so those we just do head on. In the antitrust cases, for instance, a cartel investigation, we would start sort of looking into under the radar to see, is there something here? Then we may do unannounced inspections to see, well, is there evidence to support our hypothesis? And then eventually we would send a statement of objection if we find that we have a strong case. It is, of course, for any company very troublesome to be in the searchlight of an antitrust investigation. So we are very careful to make sure that we find that we have a strong case. That doesn't mean that we have anything but a preliminary look at a case when we start it. But of course, it has to be something serious. Otherwise, we shouldn't do it.
There's a perception here, rightly or wrongly, that you're targeting American companies. I look back at the Google fine of recent weeks, 2 billion euros. It seems to give grist to those who think that you are going after American companies. I imagine a lot of what you're doing here when you travel to the U.S. is explaining yourself and the process and what companies you're looking at. What do you say to somebody who does suggest that, who feels as though you are unfairly seeking out American companies for action?
Well, first of all, I take this very seriously. Because bias has no place, no home in European antitrust. It would be completely legitimizing what we are doing, because the point is that you have a single market. It's open for business, but it's not open for bending the rules, deciding the prices in the back office. And we also actually do have the statistics on our side. When you look at mergers or antitrust enforcement, you do not find any kind of U.S. bias. And that, of course, is very, very important because it is not the flag of the company or the ownership of the company. It's the behavior in the market that we're concerned with. Let's
get into Google a little bit here. I think a lot of people are eager to hear about that issue in particular. Google has 10 days, as I understand it, to comply with the ruling that you issued a few weeks back. What are you hoping to see by then? Have you seen a draft at this point? Do you have any sense of what Google is going to try to do with regard to shopping?
Yes, now, soon to be 90 days ago, we took the decision that we have found that Google is dominant in the European market of general search, and that Google has been misusing this very strong and dominant position to promote itself with the Google Shopping product and to demote competitors. On average, you would find competitors on page 4 in your search result, and viewers can ask themselves, well, how often do I go there? While you were always finding Google Shopping top left corner in the best placement. And the decision says that you have to apply a principle of equal treatment between Google Shopping and competitors because you're dominant. And now it's up to Google to figure out, well, how to do this, because this is the only way to make a remedy future-proof, because this page design will change, screen sizes will change, everything will change. But we still need this to be adhered to. So, of course, it remains to be seen how Google will live up to this.
Bloomberg is reporting today that Google is proposing sort of an auction system. They would sell space to rival companies, and that's something they proposed in 2013 with another issue. Can you confirm that that's the case? Have they floated that as an idea?
Yes, we got a first draft of what they were thinking, I think about 2 weeks ago. So we got a broad outline about what they're thinking. But the thing is that it's not for us to approve. It is for Google to find a way to live up to the decision. And this is, of course, very important because if Google does not live up to the decision, then we will start investigating, well, what is the situation and is competition still harmed so that consumers have lesser choice that they would otherwise have.
So if come the 29th of September or however many days after you're not satisfied, when does fining start? When do you begin to calculate and assess fines against Google if they haven't met the burden that you'd like them to meet?
Well, actually, we can sort of backdate the fine so that it will start from the first day that we find that there's been a non-compliance with the decision. So obviously, if we find, for instance, competitors complain, consumers may complain to say, well, this is not what it was supposed to be. If we find reason, we will start investigating, and then we can predate the fines if we find that there is a breach of following up on the decision.
Can you give us any sense of the timetable here with these two other Google cases? There's the AdSense case and the Android case as well. How close are you to resolution of those two?
Well, they're very different, the two cases, because the AdSense case concerns placement of ads on third-party sites and whether or not that market was foreclosed. The Android case is how Android is used to stay dominant also when we all go mobile. So that the experience from the box when you open the box of your new phone is a Google experience. We treat both cases as high priority cases, but it's very difficult to say when we will be able to take a final decision.
Can you say which is farther along than the other, or are they both kind of proceeding in tandem?
Well, as I said, they're different. So we have two case teams, and I don't know if they're competing as well, but we really put a lot of effort into this because it is important for all market participants to know what will be the final decision.
A couple of months ago, I was speaking with Dara Khosrowshahi, who was then the head of Expedia. He's now, of course, at Uber, and he was expressing concern about Google with regard to travel services. When you look at the mammoth apparatus that is Google, are there other parts of the business that concern you or that might lead to investigations?
Well, we have quite a lot of complaints on other verticals. And the thing is that with the Google Shopping decision, having established that Google is dominant in general search, and when a company is dominant, well, obviously competition is already weakened a little if you hold 90% of the market. And this is where this special responsibility comes from, that you shouldn't misuse your powers in your own market or neighboring markets. So this gives us another starting point looking at travel or locals. So in that respect, yes, we still take a strong interest in Google behavior in these other markets.
I asked you if the Apple tax case had caused other companies to adjust. In the context of Google, you've levied this €2 billion fine. Have you seen that company begin to change its ways, to work with your office to forestall further fining of that company in particular? Is there a dialogue between you and the company, I guess is what I'm asking?
Oh, yes, there is a dialogue, and I find them to be very, very professional. We don't agree on these issues, but I think it is important, no matter your disagreement, and here we're talking about a decision by the Commission and a fine of, as you say, 2.4 billion euros, but it is still important to have a professional relationship because we want a change in market behavior. To enable competition so that the market serves the consumer. And on that, hopefully, we can find a way.
Commissioner Vestager, thank you very much. Very generous with your time. Appreciate that. Commissioner Margaret Vestager joining me here at the EU delegation's headquarters in Washington.